we'll go ahead and I'll present my part on the next steps to the road to compliance for final rule in Kansas. My name is Russell Bowles, and I am with KDADS. This training will address the remediation process and expectations, remediation strategies, accessing the Remediation Tab and submitting a remediation plan, technical supports and resources. Key phases of this is the systemic assessment, the provider self-assessment, heightened scrutiny, transition, ongoing monitoring, new providers or sites. Our current timeline in place, if there's any changes to the timeline, we will let you know through multiple resources. So with that being said, as of March 14th of 2014, CMS published the HCBS settings final rule. And then from September 15th, 2019 through February 29th of 2020, the provider self-assessment was available online to be completed. And then as of July 1st of 2020, our heightened scrutiny categories for 1 and 2 must be submitted to CMS. Then October 30th of 2020, heightened scrutiny category 3 must be submitted to CMS. Our July 1st of 2021 is all settings remediation evidence must be submitted to Community Connections. This is through KDAD, so we can review all of your evidence to become into compliance. And then the March 17th of 2022, all settings must be in compliance with the final rule per CMS. And that is the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. Systemic assessment. Kansas has and continues working to modify systemic documents to come into compliance with the final rule, which includes a review of statutes, regulations, policies, procedures, and contracts. There will be opportunities for stakeholders to review and provide feedback on changes during public comment periods. Provider self-assessment. This phase has been completed for all those in attendance, or should have, yes. KDADS continues to review assessments to determine what areas providers need to remediate. Remediation for Kansas is based on the idea that all providers and settings will come into compliance, will be able to do so. Remediation notifications are being processed for provider notifications now. Heightened scrutiny. Heightened scrutiny is triggered by the provider self-assessments. So however you answered your questions in the assessment will trigger how heightened scrutiny shows up or whether it shows up. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Heightened scrutiny has 3 categories. Category 1 is settings that are located in a building that is also a publicly or privately operated facility that provides inpatient institutional treatment. Category 2 are settings that are in a building located on the grounds of or immediately adjacent to a public institution. A public institution is defined as it is in Category 1. Immediately adjacent to is defined as sharing a property line. Category 3, any other settings that have the effect of isolating individuals receiving Medicaid home and community-based services from the broader community of individuals not receiving Medicaid HCBS services. Okay. Heightened scrutiny continued. Due to triggered flags during the self-assessment regarding location and/or physical characteristics of the setting, an on-site visit by KDADS must be completed to determine if the setting is HCBS compliant. Heightened scrutiny notifications to schedule a site visit will come from the heightened scrutiny director or heightened scrutiny team. This will be a second notification from the remediation notification. So with that being said, you will get a notification stating that you are need to remediate. You will get an email notification stating that you have triggered for heightened scrutiny, and then you will be, if you've triggered for heightened scrutiny categories 1 or 2, then you will receive another notification to schedule for an on-site visit by the heightened scrutiny team. Right? Okay, a provider must have overcome heightened scrutiny and be willing to collaborate with KDADS during the process in a timely manner in order to meet federal deadlines for implementation of the final rule. Transition. This is a phase we hope we don't have to go into, and we believe since everybody is able to come into compliance that we will have very little, if any, individuals go into transition. So that being said, settings choosing not to come into compliance or unable to come into compliance with final rule will not receive HCBS Medicaid funding after March 17th of 2022. HCBS clients must transition to a compliant setting before March 18th, 2022 to continue to receive HCBS funding. All remediation evidence must be submitted to communityconnectionsks.org by July 1st of 2021. This is so we have time to review that. Okay, so transition continued. The July 1st of 2021 date will allow time for KDAD's desk review of submitted evidence and to work with the provider to come into compliance before March 17th, 2022. Please note that if submitted evidence shows a setting is unable to meet final rule requirements by March 17th of 2022, it will no longer receive HCBS funding beginning March 18th of 2022. Transition notifications to persons served must begin no later than October 1st of 2021. And that is to allow us sufficient amount of time to process individuals in settings that need to transition. Ongoing monitoring. After a setting comes into full compliance with the final rule, ongoing monitoring will ensure it remains in compliance. The ongoing monitoring process is still being reviewed at KDADS to determine who will complete these ongoing tasks, and state regulations are in the process of being updated. New and closed settings. New settings will have an onboarding process at a later date in 2020. And KDADS is currently working on IT supports to enhance the database system to allow this to be a smooth process. New settings after February 29th of 2020. Providers should use the toolbox documents found at communityconnectionsks.org under the support tab to assess settings for HCBS compliance characteristics. Use missed deadline form located at the communityconnectionsks.org to notify KDADS of a new setting or closed setting. This allows us to keep track of the settings so that we can reach back out to you if needed. So KDADS will follow up with provider once onboarding process is available. All HCBS settings will be tracked in the database system, including closed settings. And closed settings are not deemed compliant. A new assessment will be required for a closed setting if it reopens in the future and is seeking to utilize HCBS funding. Road to compliance. So coming into compliance as a provider, review and consider each setting's physical location, policies, procedures, and practices when identifying strategies to come into compliance with the final rule. The requirements are to not have institutional-like characteristics in HCBS settings. It is okay as a provider to have blanket policies, procedures, and practices across multiple settings if possible. So in other words, for those providers that have multiple settings, you can have your policies, procedures, and practices standardized across all that and written down. And then if you need to specialize depending on a particular setting, you can make changes in documents to those particular settings. So, all right, and with most providers are not fully compliant, and that is okay. It's actually expected. And a couple examples of that nationwide, we selected Wyoming and Tennessee. And as you can see that approximately 86 plus% of the settings were not compliant on the first round. So that is okay. We'll work with everybody. The remediation notification. So once your self-assessment, validation, and desk review phases conclude, an email and a letter is sent to the provider for each setting, describing what needs to be remediated. If there is nothing to be remediated, the provider will get a letter of compliance for each setting. Again, compliance is based on the setting and not on the provider. The email and letter describes the remediation process and instructs providers towards a timeline of plan submission for the setting. So in other words, how you plan to remediate and in what time you plan to have that remediation completed. For each self-assessment question that needs to be remediated, the provider will select a remediation strategy or plan and a time frame for when the strategy will be completed. So again, that's you select how you want to remediate, and then you give us when you plan to have that remediation completed by. Time frames are required as part of the remediation plan, and the process will not let you continue on until you have submitted a time frame. What can be used as evidence? Certain circumstances, photographs. These can be from internet map sources and or photos taken by the agency. Keep in mind, for the most part, photographs are not standalone. They do need to used as supplemental, with the exception of a very few questions. Policies and procedures. These are agency documents that explain how an agency provides guidance in different areas, and those are the preferred resource or documentation. Handbooks and manuals. These are documents that support or clarifies agency policies and procedures. And other documentations, such as agency forms, agency brochures, agency pamphlets, rental agreements, support plans, lease agreements, and so on. If these documents are used, they should provide support or clarification to policies, procedures, handbooks, or manuals. Again, providers, please do not submit PHI on any evidence. We'll continue to reiterate that. Remediation strategies. What is the guidance? All right, so we'll talk about writing policies and procedures, what a policy should look like, what a procedure should look like. Handbooks and manuals. We'll talk about what handbooks and manuals should look like, what policies support the handbook or manual. Staff and volunteer training. What constitutes good training? What policies support the training manual? Okay, so writing policies and procedures. Policies and or procedures are the preferred documents for setting evidence. Policies and or procedures should have the following qualities at a minimum. So the organization identification, that would be your name of the organization, location of your settings, and so forth. That should be on that. You should have a policy title and or policy number that lets us know what is this policy about? What is it discussing? Policy effective date or a revised date is acceptable. That lets us know when the policy went into effect and lets us know whether it is the most current policy based on your revised date. And then again, as all policies and should be regularly reviewed for updates as needed. Handbooks. I'll kind of talk about handbooks and manuals in the same because they're very similar. So handbooks and manuals should support and or clarify a policy and or procedure. Handbooks and manuals should have the following qualities at a minimum. Again, the organization identification. Who does this handbook belong to? Purpose of the handbook. That is describing what the handbook is being used for, and that can be seen in a title or stated in a purpose statement within the manual or handbook. And what policy and or procedure does the handbook support? So it should reference back to a specific area of the policy or procedure. Is this a handbook for persons served or staff? Effective date, again, this can be a document as or as evidenced by a signature date page or initials and date. Again, we just need to know that this handbook or manual is the most recent and know what they're being, the date that it's being used from. So when it became effective. And does the handbook answer the question from the assessment? So if you're using a handbook or manual, you need to look and see if that handbook or manual answers the question on the assessment. Okay, so there's manuals, as you can see, same criteria. And other documentation. So discussing other documentation, there are other documentation submitted as evidence, and they must support or link back to a policy, procedure, handbook, or manual. And these might include residential agreements, rental agreements, person-centered plans, behavior support plans, agency forms, and so on. Keep in mind there can be exceptions, and a document can be used standalone evidence if it can validate and or answer the question. And again, when we refer to answer the question, we're referring to answering the question from the assessment. Training. What constitutes good training? Regularly making staff and volunteers aware of policies, procedures, and practices. And again, it's specifically stated out that you need to, anybody that works with clients are either going to fall into the staff or the volunteer criteria. So a clear correlation between staff and volunteer training, policies, procedures, and practices. So your training needs to link back to your policies, procedures, and practices. Regular review to update as needed. All right. Clarifications and tips. It is possible that questions marked as compliant by the provider on the self-assessment had evidence attached that did not meet validation criteria. These questions will be seen in remediation and may need clarification. With that being said, there may be just some very small adjustments or changes or wording that needs to occur. Maybe they're missing some of the minimum criteria to be considered. So again, look closely at what you have submitted for evidence to the questions on the assessment. If a question is in bold red on a remediation plan, it needs to be addressed first. as these relate to heightened scrutiny. Provider ensure provider resubmission evidence addresses the questions asked on the assessment. Okay, clarifications and tips continued. If there are multiple sites to remediate, keep a log of what has changed. This can make remediation for sites governed by the same policies much faster. Before picking the other box, carefully look at the listed options. This is in your Remediation tab when you're selecting a strategy or a plan. There are some options for you to choose from. One of those options is the other box. So if the pre-selected options that are available for you, if you what you envision for the setting remediation fits into one of those strategies already listed, please select that before the other box. If not, go ahead and select the other box and explain how you plan to remediate and what time frame you plan to remediate in. Again, checking one of those pre-selected from the list can save you time. Check and double check evidence for adherence to the specific question. Does your evidence answer the question on the assessment? For example, does staff training policies also extend to volunteers? And can people come and go whenever they please, and so on? All right. So with that, I will now turn it back over to WSU for the technical advice. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Percy Turner all day today, and my name is on this slide. My job today will be to walk you through some technical guidance around the Remediation tab and to generally frustrate you, because I wouldn't be a tech guy if I didn't make you just a little bit angry. All right, so walking down the road to compliance, we're going to start from the very beginning. First and foremost, I know that you told yourself, probably rather angrily, that you were never coming back to community connections, and yet you have to. In order to get to the Remediation tab, you have to log back into Community Connections KS.org and use the same password and username that you got to fill out your self-assessment. If you've forgotten it, feel a little bit of shame, because you should. But you can talk to me in chat, or you can email hcbs.team@wichita.edu, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Some quick things to note before you begin. Do not use Internet Explorer. Yes, I said it again. It's still bad. It still should never be used for anything, but especially on this site. Please don't upload any videos, because it will quickly exceed the maximum file size. There is a maximum file size, but when you're thinking about files that have just Word documents and things like that, you are in no danger. Videos just tend to get very big very quick. One requested change, so something that KDADs or may have asked you to do could cover multiple points of remediation. You will find, and we will talk a little bit about how this is all set up by question. So you may have one policy that covers multiple questions. You'll still need to upload it for every question you intend it to affect. Remediation plans are also per site. So what that means is if you have 2 sites and you get a plan approved for one, that does not automatically apply it to your other sites. You will need to still go through the remediation process for every one of your sites. Okay, so accessing the tab, you're going to receive notification that you need to remediate. You should use your internet browser, but not Internet Explorer. Come on. To get to communityconnectionsks.org. As I said before, you're going to log in with the same information that you used to create and complete your self-assessment. And once you log in, everything should look kind of like this. So this is a sample dashboard. The thing that's new is that giant, beautiful red arrow that is pointing to remediation. So you are going to click on the Remediation tab on your dashboard. Everything on this dashboard pertains to the self-assessment, which is closed. So you are going to go to your dashboard and then click Remediation. This is just the second half of your page. So now you've clicked the Remediation tab. The Remediation tab is very vaguely highlighted, and you'll see something that looks like this. You'll get your name, you'll get all the sites that you need, as well as some email. You'll have the dates of submission. You'll see that these things have been set to remediable, which is a fantastic word to say a bunch of times. And you'll also see whether you are in heightened scrutiny or not. From this point on, this system is what I like to call the click to move system. So if you want to see something about site C, you're going to click site C. If you want to see site B, you're going to click site B, or anything on that line. And again, if you want to see site A, same thing. So we're going to click one and we're going to move. So what we did was we moved into, I believe it was site C. And so now you're seeing every question that needs to be addressed. If you want to see more about that specific question, you're going to click on that question, right? So there's a couple things that you need to note. First, there are different colors for different things. On the page, there's actually a color legend. The most important thing for me to tell you is right now in our status box, you should get the explanation of the color. So if anybody has any issue seeing color or anything like that, there is an explanation there for you. You should be addressing anything in red or orange first. In order to address anything, though, you're going to have to click on the question. So we click, boom, and we clicked on C7A, and this is what we got. So now you're seeing the demographics again. You're seeing what the question is. You're seeing a reason for remediation. You're seeing that it was site B. I lied. It was not site C. It was site B. And you're seeing the status of that question because it hasn't been touched yet. So you're seeing all of this information, and you get to interact with what's directly beneath it, which is the strategy piece. So we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide, but note that once you click on a question, you're going to have the option of entering a strategy or choosing other and then saving it. So to go over everything I just said, so that if you're somebody who tunes me out, like some parts of my family, and you just want to read it, here it is. Select the checkbox for our remediation strategy. You're going to be prompted to enter a date next, and then just be aware that the date cannot be set past July 1 of 2021. All remediation is expected to be done and ready for KDADS to review on that day. So I said that you were going to be able to check a box or to hit other, and I told you that I would explain it, so here it goes. Each question on a remediation table is going to have a pre-populated suggested step. KDADS has put this together, and these are normally just very strong options for remediation. However, you will always have the choice to decide that that's not necessarily something that fits for you. So the other box is meant specifically for a remediation strategy that is not listed. Keep in mind, I am saying that this is a remediation strategy. This is not a place to open up a dialogue with KDADS. This is not a place to explain evidence. This is not a place to voice dissatisfaction with the process. You are only going to be putting alternate remediation strategies in the other box. And the reason that is because KDADS has to review those and approve those. So if you hit other and you say, this assessment is stupid, KDADS can't approve that and you can't move forward, right? So just be aware that the function of the other box is to discuss alternate remediation strategies that KDADS can look at and approve, okay? So having that said, one of the really important things to note is if you choose the other box, what you're doing is you're earmarking that question for KDADS to review and approve. There may be a little time lag between when you finish it and when KDADS approves it. keep in mind that you will not be able to move forward, and that KDAD strongly suggests that you wait for their feedback before you do any sort of remediable actions with a custom plan. So just be aware that there may be a little extra time needed between KDAD seeing it, approving it, and then you actually taking remediation steps. So now you've done a lot of things, right? You have identified the site that needs to be remediated. You've checked all the questions that need to be remediated. You've selected one of those questions. You've even selected a remediation strategy, or you've crafted your own. If you've crafted your own, then you've waited for KDADs to approve it, and lo and behold, it is now approved. You can submit evidence. Once a strategy has been selected alongside a timeline, I forgot to mention that, you will be able to submit evidence of that change. Submission of evidence represents a provider following through on the selected strategy. All evidence must be submitted by July 1st of 2021. Here's what that looks like. So again, we're kind of going over what we've already done. So we're showing you, here's the strategy you selected, here's the timeline you selected, and you can upload files right here. You can click choose files. That's going to open up a dialog box in your computer to where you can upload things from My Documents wherever you store things. Or you can actually just take the file and drag it into that field where it says no file chosen. That's completely up to you. And then you're going to click save when you are done. Evidence has to be uploaded for each item on a remediation plan. And just so you're aware, evidence will be validated in the same manner as a self-assessment, which means it goes through a two-step process. It is validated by our team of validators, and then it is sent to KDADs, then that desk review team for final review. So you might be asking, and if you're not, I applaud you, but you should be, how are we documenting all of this? There are people out there who have multiple sites and multiple questions per site. So how are we keeping all of this straight? The activity log is the means by which we do this. The system is designed to give you an email notification every time the status of a question changes, but especially during this COVID time, emails are usually very overloaded. A lot of people are getting full email boxes at this point from working at home, and spam and junk mail and all of that sort of stuff tends to eat up things that are sent by community connections. So it's also important that you check your email regularly and make sure that we are not being sent to your spam folder, but also you should be kind of hanging out at the site at least once a week, if not more, to look for changes. You should be checking each of your sites throughout the process. And as you can see here, the activity log has a lot of very, very useful information on it. You have who's made a change. So there's a reviewer that's updated a question. You have the provider themselves also updated, looks like they uploaded files and they saved the strategy. You see the date and the time where this happened, so you can start kind of getting a picture of all the things that have been going on with a specific site on both sides, both on the reviewer side and on the provider side. So I told you that we would talk a little bit more about resources, so here we are. First and foremost, the toolbox is an absolutely fantastic resource. The support tab in itself is a great resource. You will find the toolbox, remediation guidance, and other things on that support tab. There is a means to go to one-on-one support. The 800 number since COVID hit has not been very reliable. So I am going to tell you not to use the 1-800 number as of right now, but to go to live chat. So the live chat is on communityconnectionsks.org. It is kind of a creepy function that we have that follows you throughout your pages and asks you if you need help. It is the most efficient way to connect with somebody, even if you try and talk to someone and there's nobody there, someone's going to the bathroom, or maybe it's a lunchtime or something like that. All the data gets logged and created a ticket, and usually what I'll do is make sure that you get an email from the next group that we're going to talk about, or the next support piece we're going to talk about, and that is the hcbs.team@wichita.edu email. Again, that is HCBS, as in Home and Community Based Services, .team, TEAM, @wichita.edu. that email address, you can absolutely email and ask for help. You can also sign up for email updates at Community Connections. There are stakeholder calls the third Wednesday of every month from 12 to 1 and from 5:30 to 6:30 if you are a night owl. The phone line and the code is there for you. If you have any further questions, always use the chat and the email, and you can attention Percy Turner, that is me, and we will get things figured out for you. This is also not the last you'll see of us in terms of training. We have other things that are going on. We have a learning collaborative that's starting up in September of 2020. We have more trainings coming out regarding some more nuanced and specific things around heightened scrutiny. We have the remediation guidance document that is going to go question by question and help show you what strong evidence looks like. So we are just going to continue to try and walk you down this road of compliance. Please do not hesitate to get in touch with us and ask specific questions to help get your problems answered. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.